Okay, so welcome to lecture 2 of week 2. I finished with the Odyssey. That was the last lecture that you should have seen from on books 19 to 24. I would like to pick up from that and give a little discussion on the transition from Greek Homeric epic to Greek tragedy. The period extends from the Homeric poems about the 8th or the 9th century BC to Sophocles, who was one of the great Greek playwrights. The period of these plays was around 428 to 425 BC. So you've got about 5 centuries of a cultural transition. And one of the key things I want to talk about is the relationship between the founding of Greek law and its inspiration from Athena at the end of the Odyssey into Greek tragedy and into Greek culture. Greek tragedy would reflect a lot of the idea, much of the culture, and I want to explain how that works. So, the Iliad and the Odyssey have a tremendous influence on Sophocles, Oedipus, Tyrannus, and Antigone. One of the key influences is the Tiresias figure. Remember that Odysseus went into Hades and met with Tiresias, the blind prophet, or the blind seer. Tiresias makes an appearance in both Oedipus, Tyrannus, and Antigone. So his role as a prophet, able to interpret not merely prophecy, not merely in the sense of interpreting the future, but interpreting human nature, seeing into human nature, and that this for the Greeks is especially concerned with the relationship between human nature and the gods. Again, the key idea is hubris or pride that we saw in Odysseus. So, part of that is an exploration of psychological and spiritual depths of the human person, which can be characterized largely as a form of reflection, self-reflection, a knowledge of the self, not only oneself as a human being, but one's own particular limits, one's own particular capabilities, one's own particular strengths, one's own particular weaknesses. This becomes expressed as a form of insight or blindness. The motif of blindness is very clearly picked up in Oedipus Tyrannus. And again, the exploration of the question of pride and hubris it can only be understood and considered in Greek culture in its relationship to the gods. There would be no hubris if there were no acknowledgement of the relationship between human nature and the gods. Right. So that's a key point. I would say Achilles and Odysseus find some sort of articulation or exploration, some of their characteristics of hubris and pride find expression in Oedipus, the character of Oedipus in Oedipus Tyrannus, in Creon, in Antigone, and perhaps even Antigone herself, who's the great heroine of the play Antigone. We are not reading the Oresteia, which is also a 3-part play. Oedipus, the Sophocles plays, Oedipus Tyrannus and Antigone are part of a three-play cycle. There's a middle play called Oedipus at Colonus that we're not reading. It's not necessary to understand Antigone, the play Antigone. It's not necessary that you read Oedipus at Colonus to understand Antigone. It's an interesting play, but it's beyond the scope, I think, of this course. I think it's an interesting play, but has a kind of, I don't know. It's got different issues than the ones I want to explore in relation to law, and in relation to blindness. So the Oresteia was a three-part set of plays written by Aeschylus, who came before Sophocles, and he wrote a play called three plays, one called the Agamemnon, one called the Furies, and the other called the Eumenides. And it follows the cycle of violence from the Iliad to the founding of law. So that set of plays is in the background of what Sophocles is doing. And the issue that set of plays by Aeschylus raises is the issue of Achilles' anger, and which gets picked up as a kind of cycle of violence. Remember how Athena was able to somehow purge the emotions of the Ithacans, not deny them and not remove them, but they purge the memories, so that the memories no longer cause a desire for violence and for revenge. So Aeschylus's plays show how law takes this idea of the demand for justice, which is rooted in the blood and the earth for Greek culture, and assimilates the powers of a culture in such a way that is satisfied. The demand for justice is satisfied without leading to the cycle of violence, which just perpetuates itself, right? Somebody kills my kin, I kill their kin, they come after me, my kin goes after them. It never ends. But law is a way of satisfying the demands of justice and revenge without creating this cycle of violence. We're going to see, by the way in which that cycle of violence, that demand for justice, is articulated in a very different way in pagan Norse culture. Pagan Norse culture has a very different sense, a different set of conditions, religious conditions, from Southern Norse culture, and Southern pagan culture, not Northern pagan culture. So Beowulf is Northern pagan culture, and we'll see the different elements involved in that. Okay, so Sophocles comes later. Aeschylus really is kind of you would think of his tragedy, of his stagecraft, as less refined. It's great, but there are formal elements to it, I think, that wind up becoming less dramatic. Let's just put it this way. Aeschylus finds ways of articulating concepts as kind of ideas through the chorus. Sophocles is able to dramatize ideas. One has to be really acute and aware of some of the ideas that are submerged in the drama. And because of that, Sophocles, I think, is a greater work of art. But it's only because Aeschylus comes before him and tries to articulate certain things. It's always the great art that comes before that leads to other great art. So it's just that Sophocles comes later. Maybe it's not so much that Aeschylus is a lesser playwright, but it takes Aeschylus's um, forays into Greek tragedy for Sophocles to hone his art. And we'll see that. I think there's no doubt that Oedipus, Tyrannus, and Antigone are almost perfect forms of dramatization. They're just some of the most remarkable plays that have ever been written, and people keep coming back to them over and over again. So, as you can tell, I'm drinking my coffee. I'm going to make this lecture fairly short at the transition, and I'll make a separate lecture for Oedipus Tyrannus and a separate lecture for Antigone. But gosh, there's a lot of traffic going around this morning. For some reason, motorcycles take long drives and they come out to where I live in Ave Maria from Naples, and they come out. There's a pub out there they like to hang out at. So I guess it's close to lunch. So I'm sorry if you hear stuff in the background. I hope it doesn't impede your understanding of what I'm saying. I want to just talk about Greek tragedy now, and some of the characteristics of Greek tragedy for you to look at and think about as you're reading Oedipus, Tyrannus, and Antigone. First of all, the definition of tragedy is a series of characters who move from the very highest to the very lowest. Oedipus is at the top of the totem pole, not top of the totem pole, the top of the mountain totem pole. That's a silly thing to say. Very top, right, of Greek culture. Something that he does, some part of his character, linked with some external conditions that he could not control, cast him down to the lowest status there is. Okay, the dramatization of from the highest to the lowest has the effect on the audience, who are not high, right? Who are probably, citizens who are not of the highest order, but still highly. Greek culture is highly accomplished at this time. Would be to include. They would see this spectacle taking place, and they would say, "Aha! If this can happen to this person, it can happen to me." So because it's the highest going to the lowest, anybody can fall. Nobody is immune from falling. That's how the Greek culture would see this. It enacts one of the things I talked about at the end of the Odyssey the other day in the last lecture is that all knowledge for Greek culture comes through suffering. So going from the highest to the lowest would involve a tremendous amount of suffering and pain. From that, if one is open, the question of Oedipus being open to suffering and therefore giving him knowledge, I think it's clear that by the end of this play, he does not gain any knowledge. He does not gain wisdom. He does in the play that we're not reading, Oedipus at Colonus. That's where he learns wisdom out of suffering. So knowledge, wisdom always comes out of suffering. So these plays enact a form of knowing. They always come at a price. Okay. All right. So we'll pay attention to that dramatization of the highest, the lowest, the dramatization of suffering coming to knowledge. This always involves what the Greeks would have called hamartia, Hamartia, hamartia. It's translated frequently as the tragic flaw. I don't like this term tragic flaw because it 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 has a kind of, I think, a kind of it adds a sense to it that makes Oedipus somehow special. I think he is special in a way, but this idea of tragic flaw should be conceived as something innate in all human beings, not just Oedipus. It involves, again, a fall. It somehow involves fate, not as a kind of predetermination, but as one saying, well, given who Oedipus was at this particular point, how could he act otherwise? Right? So the sense of fate shouldn't be conceived as a predetermined thing. It just should be, oh, this person has these characteristics. Of course they're going to do this. Right? Maybe an analogy from sports, right? Of course, I don't know, Michael Jordan is going to win 6 championships, right? He had the ability, right? He was better than everybody else for all those years. So why wouldn't you expect him to win championships? Think of it positively as an ability. Given certain abilities, certain strengths, certain characteristics, certain flaws, right? Of course, these mistakes are going to be made. So think of fate not in terms of something predetermined, but in certain predispositions of a character that lead them to act in particular ways. This always leads to what Aristotle, in his Poetics, referred to on the part of the audience watching this. Remember, this is a spectacle to be seen. A form of catharsis. The audience would in a particularly effective Greek tragedy, would feel a kind of purging of the emotions. Not euphoria, not a happiness, but a kind of common sense of a community with others. This is what it means to be a human being, right? To understand the shared nature of the human condition as one that includes suffering, and that there is a kind of good that comes out of that if you endure the suffering, and that is knowledge. Knowledge comes out of that. Okay, so catharsis is not a euphoria, it's not a resolution, but a kind of recognition. Aristotle, in talking about Sophocles and Oedipus Tyrannus, said it's recognition all the way through. That's how highly Aristotle thought of Oedipus Tyrannus. It's recognition all the way through. And I think what he meant by that is that we should see the human condition in Oedipus Tyrannus, in Oedipus's character, all the way through. That is really high praise for a work of literature. Okay, so the chorus plays a part in all Greek tragedy. They show up occasionally as they would be considered as real characters. You would consider them as the normal, ordinary Athenian. They provide commentary on the action. They're not always reliable, but they're insightful. They're sometimes ironic. They frequently foreshadow an end. So they play an interesting role as both participants in the action, but observers. And in some ways, recognizing through a kind of instinct and through fear what's going to happen. So the chorus, pay close attention to the chorus. Frequently poetic, actually always poetic, musical. They remember that these tragedies would have been uh, would have been, not remember, but it's because you might not know this, but these tragedies would have been performed with a musical accompaniment. Think of them as a kind of opera. They would have been performed with the accompaniment of a lyre, especially the chorus. It would have been all of the words would have been chanted. Think of even Oedipus speaking would be a kind of chant. So a kind of like an opera. Um, Maybe not as orchestrally sophisticated, um, but musical. Okay. All right. Tragedies were part of a religious festival that were performed every year. Um, the held in Athens, and it would have been the festival of Dionysus, who is the god of music, the god of poetry, a god associated with Bacchus, with wine. Um, Dionysus is a god associated um, with the characteristic of human beings being able to go outside of themselves in some way and connect with the world. This is called ecstasis, ecstasy. And again, not necessarily pleasure, sometimes involving pain and pleasure, and ecstasy, an ecstatic going outside of oneself and connecting with the world. That's why there would be a catharsis at the end, a kind of recognition of human culture as shared, and all of us involved in the same human condition. So this is a religious experience, a civic experience in which all of Athens, at least all of the citizens of Athens, would be present, and um, a civic and a religious festival. You cannot untangle those two elements. Greek culture, a religious civic culture, the two of them bound together closely. And these plays articulate that, both of them. Okay. The oracles play a very important role in Sophocles. They are the only source of divination. They unfortunately speak in riddles, so they have to be interpreted. They are frequently ambiguous and deceptive. Oedipus's big problem when he hears the oracles of Delphi, which are the only oracles that are consulted in these plays. The most important oracle of Greek culture is the Oracle of Delphi. And Oedipus thinks he understands what it means, and he completely misinterprets it because he doesn't understand himself. The motto of the Oracle of Delphi is know thyself. And so you better know yourself when you go to the Oracle of Delphi. And the oracles frequently know the person, so they will not give easy answers. They generally give answers that are deceptive, so that the person who hears them goes out and does something that then causes suffering, so that they understand what's going on. I've been to Greece, but I've never been to Delphi. I had a teacher, my Latin teacher at the University of Iowa when I was an undergraduate, was this very large 80-year-old woman named Gerda Seligson, who was an Austrian who grew up in Switzerland. And she was a marvelous Latin teacher. And I remember her just sitting at the front desk looking at us all. And she spoke with a German accent, and she said, You must go to Delphi. There is something happening there. And she looked over to her right, And we all looked over to the right to see what she was looking at. And there was nothing there, of course. She saw something. So something is happening at the Oracle of Delphi. I've got to go back. My wife and I want to go to Greece, and I think Delphi is on the bucket list for me. So certainly has been since I heard her speak. I had already been to Greece and missed Delphi when I was there. So I traveled Europe when I was 19 years old with my bicycle. With my bicycle that is right there. I still own it. It's over 40 years old. Took that bike over to Europe with me. Put it on trains and got off the trains and rode around European cities. It's amazing. I take that bike on 8 or 10 or 12 mile rides almost every day. I've had it with me since I was 19. I'm 59 now, so it's kind of amazing. At any rate, sorry, I'd like to tell you little tidbits about myself that are interesting and maybe amuse you. Okay, so the oracles are frequently ambiguous, deceptive, tricking people into acting so that they find out something about themselves. That's the greatness of the Oracle of Delphi. Okay. Something about Greek tragedy now. About plays themselves, but especially heightened sense of this in Greek tragedy. Plays are a drama, right? They generally are spectacles, right? We watch them, we observe them, we see them unfold on the stage, and they're drama between human beings, right? There are generally no actions taking place in a Greek tragedy. When Oedipus gouges his eyes out at the end of this play, we do not see him doing that. We see him come out with a mask on. They all would have been wearing masks, by the way. So you don't see the face, actually. You see faces that are painted, but it's the words themselves that carry the force of the drama in plays, especially in Greek tragedy. So it's the words themselves that display an interior disposition on the part of characters. That interior disposition is where the main action is. The drama takes place between people, but the drama takes place between the ears, in the head, in the interior space of each character. So we have to constantly be interpreting these characters, right? We have to look inside their souls and see their wills, their thoughts, their beliefs, what motivates them. So the main action in a Greek tragedy takes place in the spiritual, what could be called the spiritual contours of the human person. We need to interpret them and what's going on. Okay. So very important point about Greek tragedy. It's especially heightened, even more so, I think, than Shakespeare's plays. There is some action in Shakespeare's plays that takes place on the stage. In Greek tragedy, none of it takes place there. Okay, the last point I want to make on this introduction, this lecture linking the Homeric epics with Greek tragedy, is the role of Tyrannos, the tyrant. Athens is a democracy. Even in court decisions, not simply in the making of laws, but in deciding really important cases. For example, the case of Socrates, the teacher of Plato being the teacher of Aristotle. Socrates was put to death for certain ideas that he had, which were very revolutionary. There's no doubt that the authorities had reason to be afraid of him. The charges were trumped up, but at any rate, 501 citizens were involved in the decision in that court case, right? 501 men. So think about this. This is full participation in the culture, right? So democracy is real democracy. We don't have democracy. We have a republic, right? We elect officials that make the laws. This happens at even lower levels of government, right? But the Athenians, everybody participated. By the way, the only citizens in a Greek democracy were men who were owners of property. So it's not full participation of everybody. But they were fearful of tyrants, of one person who would come and make all the laws. So Oedipus Tyrannus and Antigone deal with the horror of tyranny, the fear of one person coming and ruling. So keep that in mind. That's the drama that's unfolding here. That's one of the key contents of these plays. This idea of the tyrant who imposes his will upon everybody. And this is dramatized. By the way, the idea I think that's dramatized is that one person ruling will always become a tyrant. So the fear of tyranny was the fear of one person ruling who could never be checked. By the way, it seems to always be the case. And that's why we're afraid of any form of tyranny now in our government. Okay, so that's my lecture. And you should look for a lecture on Oedipus Tyrannus. I don't know if I'm going to get to one today. I have to drive over to Jupiter and get some stuff out of my office. But I'm not sure if but certainly tomorrow, by tomorrow, we'll have Oedipus Tyrannus and Antigone up and available for you. Two of my favorite things to teach in the entire world. So I love it. All right. See you soon.